It is time for section 1. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 5. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 5.
Good morning. Excuse me, do you have a moment to spare for a brief survey on local transport? It won't take more than 10 minutes.
Of course. Happy to help.
Thank you. This survey is commissioned by the City Council. We're collecting residents' travel habits, reasons for journeys, and suggestions for improvements. To start, could you tell me how you travelled into town today?
I travelled by tram this morning. I caught the 7:15 tram from Elmwood Station. It was quite punctual, and the conductor made helpful announcements about service changes.
Excellent. Now, I'll just get some personal details. May I ask your name?
Yes, my name's Alex Turner.
Could you spell your surname for me, please?
Certainly. Turner.
Thank you. And what's your home address, Alex?
It's 72 Linden Street.
Linden Street. Yes, that's near the Old Oak District, right?
Exactly.
And could you confirm your postcode for our records?
It's OX3 5HQ.
Perfect. Now, what do you do? Are you employed locally, or are you a student?
I'm a graphic designer at Mediart's studio downtown.
Great. And what brought you into town today?
I'm here to meet a client at the Municipal Art Gallery. We have a presentation scheduled.
Thank you, that's very clear.
Now you have some time to look at questions 6 to 10. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 6 to 10.
Now, on to the final section. We'd like your ideas on how to improve transport services and facilities around the city, especially for people travelling to work or appointments.
Well, first of all, I've noticed that some of the bus stops along Maple Avenue have no shelter. On rainy days, commuters are left exposed for up to 20 minutes. Adding covered shelters with benches would really improve the waiting experience.
That's a good point.
Secondly, I think pedestrian pathways are too narrow in some areas, particularly along Rose Lane. They're often obstructed by street vendors or parked bicycles. Widening those paths and enforcing clear zones would encourage more people to walk rather than drive short distances.
Understood.
Finally, regarding public transport frequency, the trains running on the Eastern Line only come every 45 minutes outside peak hours. If the city could increase frequency to at least every 30 minutes, it would make train travel a far more attractive option.
Thank you. Lastly, the Council is exploring ways to encourage more people to cycle to work. What measures do you think would help increase cycling uptake?
Well, at my studio, we have no secure bicycle parking, just a few racks that are visible from the street. Providing a locked cycle storage room with CCTV would ease concerns about theft.
I see.
Also, many main roads like Elm Road and High Street lack dedicated cycle lanes. Cyclists must share busy lanes with cars. Installing clearly marked, physically separated cycle tracks on those routes would boost safety and confidence.
Right.
And lastly, arriving at work after a strenuous ride can be uncomfortable without shower or changing facilities. If employers could provide a simple shower and locker room for cyclists, I'd definitely consider commuting by bike year-round.
That's very useful feedback.
One more suggestion. Many people, including myself, would feel more comfortable cycling if there were affordable training courses on road cycling skills and urban traffic navigation. Subsidized cycle training programs run by the council or community centers could help novices become confident riders.
Excellent. That completes our survey. Thank you very much for your time and valuable suggestions.
You're welcome. Have a great day.
That is the end of section 1. You now have half a minute to check your answers. It is time for section 2. First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 14. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 14. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to share some exciting news about improvements being made to the city's community facilities. Today, I'll be giving you an update on the refurbishment of the Greenfield Community Library and the launch of a new community gardening project in Riverside Park. Let's begin with the library. Many of you expressed concern in last year's community feedback survey about the outdated facilities at Greenfield Library. With funding support from the National Literacy Foundation, the City Council has been able to carry out a complete refurbishment. One of the most notable upgrades is the creation of a modern multimedia suite on the first floor. This includes 12 new computers, printing stations, and even a 3D printer that can be used for educational projects. But perhaps the most exciting addition is the virtual reality zone. This will allow students to explore historical sites, science experiments, and even other countries in an immersive way. Accessibility was another major issue. To address this, the building now has ramps, a new elevator, and wider aisles between bookshelves, making it easier for wheelchair users to navigate. The children's section has also been expanded, with cosy reading corners, colourful seating, and storytelling zones to promote a love for reading among our youngest residents. Now, regarding the opening date. Although the renovations were originally expected to finish by the end of August, a few delays with the electrical work mean the new launch date has been pushed to September 10th. The good news is that on opening day, there will be a local author giving a talk and signing books. In fact, we'd like your input on who this should be. We're running a poll on the council website this week, so be sure to vote. Now you have some time to look at questions 15 to 20. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 15 to 20. Let's move on now to the Riverside Park Community Garden, another exciting development aimed at bringing residents together. The idea for this came from a group of local teenagers involved in the summer volunteer programme. They noticed that while Riverside Park was large and green, a section of it near the old tennis courts was rarely used and had become overgrown. After some discussion, they proposed a plan for a community garden that would involve local schools, retired residents, and families. The garden is divided into 5 sections, each with a different theme. The first area is the herb zone, where plants like rosemary, mint, and basil are grown in raised beds. This part is looked after mainly by older volunteers who use the herbs for community cooking classes. Next is the butterfly garden. This section is filled with wildflowers and native plants designed to attract bees, butterflies, and other pollinators. Children from the local primary school helped plant this area and regularly visit to observe insect life for their science lessons. Then we have the vegetable patch, a fully organic space where families can rent a small plot to grow their own vegetables. There's even a shared tool shed and watering station. For those interested in art and culture, we've created a sculpture path lined with small statues and mosaics created by local artists and school children. This peaceful walking route leads visitors through the entire garden from one section to the next. Lastly, there's the relaxation corner, a quiet zone with benches, wind chimes, and a small fountain designed especially for mindfulness activities, yoga, and reading. Local therapists will run weekly sessions here once the garden officially opens. The grand opening for the Riverside Park Community Garden will be held on August 22nd, with live music, food stalls, and family activities throughout the day. We hope you'll join us in celebrating this wonderful addition to our city. That is the end of section 2. You now have half a minute to check your answers. It is time for section 3. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 24. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 24.
Right, Olivia, let's organise our presentation. I'll cover Heyerdahl's youth and early influences, and then you can take over with his adult expeditions and theories. Sound good?
Perfect. So, Victor, for your part, start by describing Thor Heyerdahl's childhood. Focus on the kinds of activities he enjoyed and how that shaped his later interests.
Absolutely. Thor Heyerdahl was born in 1914 in Larvik, Norway. From a young age, he showed an unusual fascination with the natural world. 2 hobbies in particular captured his imagination: collecting seashells and folk art from the Norwegian coast, and building elaborate models of boats using driftwood he found on the beach. He turned a corner of his family's attic into a little museum, displaying these shells and models in labeled glass cases. His parents thought it charming, but it was far more than a pastime. It revealed his early passion for exploration and assembly of evidence.
Interesting. And unlike many children in his town who joined their fathers on fishing trips, he preferred to stay home, cataloguing the items he found and reading adventurous travelogues by candlelight. He didn't follow his father on hunting expeditions. Instead, he would sit by the fireplace listening to his mother read aloud from natural history books.
Yes, that's right. He often said that those readings sparked his love of stories about distant lands. After secondary school, he briefly studied zoology and geography at the University of Oslo. Then, just months after graduating, he decided to marry his classmate, Anita Gron, who shared his curiosity about remote cultures. Together, they agreed to test their resilience by living on a small, windswept island off the Norwegian coast for an entire year.
That island experiment was fascinating. What were the reasons they chose that lifestyle?
They had two main motivations. First, they wanted to experience isolation in a harsh environment to see how extreme weather would influence daily routines and social interactions. And second, they aimed to acquire practical survival skills, building shelters from local materials, sourcing fresh water, and learning to fish with simple tools before venturing to even more remote regions.
Exactly. And they documented everything meticulously. Daily journals, sketches of the coastline, and notes on the changing seasons. That experience, in fact, laid the groundwork for Heyerdahl's later focus on how environment shapes culture. You should mention that before you move on to his radical archaeological ideas.
Will do. I'll end by describing his discovery of enigmatic petroglyphs carved into sandstone outcrops on the island, symbols that didn't match any known Scandinavian tradition. From examining those carvings, he developed his first major theory that ancient peoples might have crossed oceans using simple rafts, carrying their art and customs with them.
Now you have some time to look at questions 25 to 30. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 25 to 30.
Great conclusion. Then I'll pick up with his adult career, starting with the Kon-Tiki expedition as practical proof that prehistoric sea travel was possible from east to west. But first, let's ensure we have the academic context. Before Heyerdahl's theory, scholars believed Polynesia was settled exclusively from Asia to the west.
Right, academics argued that long east-to-west voyages were impossible because of the vast empty Pacific, coupled with the prevailing wind and current patterns that favored travel only from west to east.
And they also pointed out that the coastal communities on the eastern shores of South America used only small canoes, lacking the capacity to carry large groups or heavy cargo. But Heyerdahl noticed that those same communities built log rafts for coastal trade, suggesting they could adapt seafaring techniques.
That observation led him to the idea of Kon-Tiki, constructing a 45-foot balsa wood raft using only the tools and materials available to pre-Columbian South Americans. It was seen by many as reckless, but to him it was a necessary experiment. Some said he did it to build his own legend, demonstrating personal bravery. What's your take?
I think both motives played a role, but chiefly he wanted to test his theory through direct action, scientific experimentation on the high seas. His goal wasn't personal glory, although that came later. It was to gather empirical data about drift patterns, navigational possibilities, and the practicality of ancient construction methods.
True. And speaking of methods, he insisted on authenticity. He refused to use modern ropes or steel nails, opting instead for native hemp fibers and wooden pegs cast in situ. To him, the purity of construction was most important.
Indeed, that's why he rejected offers to motor pull the raft or use radio navigation aids. He wanted to rely entirely on wind, currents, and the stars.
The voyage itself covered nearly 4,300 nautical miles in 101 days from Peru to the Tuamotuan atolls. It tested every hypothesis: drift speed, food preservation without refrigeration, and the psychological effects of limited crew space.
And after Kon-Tiki's dramatic end on a reef, Heyerdahl capitalized on the publicity to visit Easter Island. Contrary to popular belief, he did not sail there on a reed boat. That was part of a later Egyptian project. Instead, he flew in, intent on studying the island's massive stone statues, called moai.
Correct. On Easter Island, he interviewed elder islanders about oral traditions concerning statue carving and transport. Then he organized his own carving workshop using ancient-style basalt chisels to reshape a fallen moai fragment, learning firsthand the labor and skill involved.
That effort exemplified his approach, reconstructing past processes to shed light on archaeological mysteries. Even when his overarching theory that Polynesia was first settled from South America was disproven by genetic and linguistic evidence, his methods influenced experimental archaeology profoundly.
Exactly. He's now considered the pioneer of practical archaeology, bringing lab hypotheses into real-world testing. However, some critics argue his conclusions about Polynesian origins distracted from more plausible migration models. Still, his impact on the discipline is undeniable.
Right. And finally, your sources slide will list his memoir, Kontatiki, the documentary footage by his crew, and the academic paper by his biographer, William Oliver. You should note that Oliver's book, while thorough, reads in an overly grandiose style that undercuts its scientific clarity.
Good point. I found Oliver's writing vivid, but the tone felt too much like heroic epic rather than sober analysis. We can suggest that future editions adopt a more concise academic register.
Perfect. That wraps up both sections neatly. Now, let's draft our PowerPoint slides and rehearse the transitions.
That is the end of section 3. You now have half a minute to check your answers. It is time for section 4. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
I've spent the last few months meeting with senior executives in industries ranging from manufacturing to digital services, and I reviewed several white papers on the emerging trends in leadership. In today's seminar, I'd like to share some observations about how management practices may evolve over the next decade. This isn't a detailed statistical forecast, but rather a set of themes for us to consider and debate. First, let's look at business markets. I anticipate a sharp rise in competition among firms worldwide as barriers to entry continue to fall and niche providers emerge from unexpected places. For example, a niche food producer in South America might soon compete directly with brands in Europe, North America, and East Asia. Alongside this, we're likely to see large corporations wielding ever greater influence because mergers and strategic alliances create entities whose scale rivals that of small nations. Finally, rapid economic growth in regions such as Southeast Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Latin America is driving up demand for consumer goods and services at a pace we haven't seen before, placing pressure on supply chains and raw materials. Second, consider external influences on businesses. Companies are increasingly involving end users in product development. Rather than launching goods and hoping they sell, forward-looking organizations hold design workshops with customers, conduct online polls, and even co-create prototypes with user groups. At the same time, mounting environmental concerns, ranging from carbon emissions to plastic waste, will prompt governments and NGOs to enact stricter regulation. Manufacturers may be required to demonstrate recyclability or extend warranties, and digital service providers might need to show how they minimize data center energy use. Third, I want to touch on business structures. Traditional hierarchies are giving way to flexible, project-based teams. In the coming years, I expect firms to form groups of specialists around each new project, pulling together marketers, engineers, data scientists, and legal advisors for a defined period. Once the objectives are met, the team disbands and its members move to the next initiative. This model encourages agility and knowledge sharing, but also requires strong coordination and change management skills. Fourth, there's a shift in how people view work. For many professionals, employment is now just one element of a broader lifestyle. With labor forces stagnating in some developed markets, companies must compete to offer benefits that attract talent. Flexible hours, remote working options, and even sabbatical arrangements. Technology advances make it feasible for employees to log in from home, a co-working space, or another country, reducing geographic constraints and enabling a healthier work-life balance. Fifth, let's discuss management styles. Efficiency alone won't suffice for future leaders. They will need exceptional leadership capabilities to guide organizations through rapid change, shifting stakeholder expectations, and ethical dilemmas. Empathy, communication, and the ability to foster cross-functional collaboration will be essential traits. Moreover, as more women ascend to top roles, we're likely to see a more consultative and inclusive approach to decision-making, moving away from purely top-down directives. Sixth, we can't ignore economic changes. While manufacturing and traditional services remain important, the value of intellectual property is soaring. A hit television series or a popular software platform can generate massive revenues from spin-off products, licensing deals, and data-driven services. Meanwhile, a growing number of professionals are choosing the freedom of self-employment over the security of a single employer. This trend towards self-employed work means organizations may increasingly rely on a mix of full-time staff and contract experts, requiring new approaches to workforce planning and talent development. To sum up, over the next 10 years, I believe we'll see more intense global competition, the rise of mega-corporations, and surging demand from new markets. Companies will consult customers more deeply and face tougher regulation on environmental grounds. Business units will form around each project, and employees will value flexible arrangements and remote options. Managers must cultivate strong leadership skills, and a wave of women in senior roles will transform corporate cultures. Finally, intellectual property's contribution to GDP will grow even as more people become self-employed. That concludes my overview. I'd now like to open the floor for questions and discussion.
That is the end of the listening test.